Women Who Rock with Success is a digital media brand for professional women. Our platform offers opportunities to expand the performances of women within our media sources. Our platform include media TV, digital podcasting, and printed media. Genres for women include business and marketing, cooking, health and fitness, fashion and interior designing, sports, travel, and policy and government. Women Who Rock with Success is ready to brand your model of business and entertainment for success.
And good morning. And this is Ms. Winbush with Women Who Rock Investigates. And so thank you for tuning in with us. Today, we have a perhaps maybe a sensitive topic that we're going to be discussing, but it's something certainly that needs to be discussed and to be able to bring answers in regards to the crisis at the border. And we know that perhaps maybe over 2 million immigrants, according to reports, the news media states that they have crossed over into the United States. And so we want to kind of get the understanding. This is nothing to be biased or judgmental against immigrants. It's just to trying to learn as to why the crisis is so grievous. And so to be able to help us to understand a little bit more about that, we have a special guest that's in the studio with us. It's Irina, if I'm pronouncing that right, Tsukerman, if I'm pronouncing that right. So anyway, she will be able to tell us a little bit more about her and what she do and her profession. So good morning and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I am a national security lawyer as well as a specialist in human rights. Additionally, I also work as a geopolitical analyst. I have a company called Scarab Rising, which provides media and security strategic advice, which includes geopolitical analysis, human intelligence, and addresses various concerns around the globe. And of course, as part of my practice, I have had my share of work in immigration specifically, including assisting asylum seekers, as well as advising the US government on policies involving the security vetting of asylum seekers and refugees, because that is for sure part of a process, and I've had to deal with critical life and death situations as part of that work. And of course, I've also had my chance to interact with experts and journalists and migrants from various backgrounds as part of this work that includes both government and former government officials and security specialists, that includes analysts and journalists covering the crisis, that includes people who have had to flee here in a variety of ways. So I have been exposed to broad perspectives on the subject.
Okay, great. Wow, that is an impeccable bio from you. And so thank you. That's the reason why we have the experts on the show. And so thank you so much for that. So we first, I guess, want to, Irina, to be able to learn a little bit as to why, in your perspective of what you have seen in the, perhaps maybe in the past. So first of all, let's rewind back. So I'm going to give you a little history about me. I had an opportunity to work in the corrections division probably about 15 years ago. And so I did that for probably about 8 years. And even with that, it was a federal institution. So we worked with immigrants, we worked with offenders who perhaps were on a federal level. And so we would go and pick them up. It was a very, very tedious process when it came to processing them in, simply because of the fact that some of them a lot of them didn't speak English or what have you. They just wanted perhaps maybe to, I guess, get an opportunity to get to the United States to have more better equality living. Not sure actually what the whole entire cake of that was. But I know that we would have to go and pick them up, and then we had to go and take them to the airport sometimes when they got deported. So this broadcast today is not in favor of either side, whether it's the United States or whether it's the immigrations. We're trying to get to, and we've done a case study on this before, I think about 2 or 3 years ago, but we still like to keep our viewers and our audience up in this area in regards to the latest news, because we have a outpour of immigrants that have crossed over the border, which that is illegal. We want to make sure that we understand that we're not helping anyone to do anything illegal, not on our broadcasters. We have a disclaimer that's going to be posted as we post to all of our shows that we have. So first of all, help us to understand as to why the crisis is so large, first of all, and as to why the immigrants, perhaps maybe from Honduras, because I know when I worked for the correctional division, there were people that was coming over from Honduras, they was coming over illegal from not just Mexico. And so people don't understand that. They be traveling for a lot of hundreds and thousands of miles to be able to get to freedom. So we want to understand a little bit about that.
Well, I'll actually start with that. It's true that Mexico is actually not even the #1 country that from where these asylum seekers, refugees, and migrants originate. The top countries are actually the Northern Triangle countries: El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. And I'll begin by saying, when you have a crisis of massive proportions with hundreds of thousands of people trying to cross the border on a monthly basis, something is wrong. And it's wrong on both the side of origin and it's on the side of US policy and impact that it has. So a crisis affects both sides, and a crisis results from policies from both sides of the equation here. It's not spontaneous, nothing happens on its own. It's a result of conditions, and it's a result of policies. So so besides, I'll deal with Central America specifically in a moment and what's going on there. But in addition to these Central American countries, there are also people fleeing through the borders from all over the world, from Southeast Asia, countries such as Bangladesh, from African countries. So their journey is even longer than anyone in the Western Hemisphere. And even from Russia, a number of Russian migrants who previously had visas now to come to the US quite easily, and they could just simply overstay the visa if that was their choice. Now, because the visas for Russian citizens are so much harder to get, they cross over through various countries, most often through Turkey, and end up in Mexico, and from there they cross the borders. Why that is, why they choose to do it that way, I'll get to in a moment. Why they don't stay in Turkey, I'll also get to in a moment. But coming back to Central American countries, for a long time, those countries have been quite poor. There's been a variety of civil conditions on the ground, civil wars in El Salvador, a lot of mayhem, a lot of issues that have been frankly exacerbated by US policies in Central America. But in recent years, that has started to change. There has been an active crackdown on gangs. Within the past year, over 40,000 people have been arrested, and many of them ended up in prison. And for a small country, that's a huge number.
Wow.
So the policies there and in Guatemala especially have been changing, and even Honduras is now considering a crackdown on the criminal element that contributed to the impoverishment and unsafe conditions in the country, that caused people to flee, and that contributed to economic problems that made life literally unlivable for people. They have Guatemala and El Salvador have governments that very much are in line with US principles of contributing to prosperity and safe environment. But so why is this not working? Why is there still such an influx? Well, first of all, it takes time to change conditions. Even though things are improving there, the economy is growing. There is a return to tourism, and the conditions are much safer. It's still not perfect, it's still poor, and it's going to take time for the economies to improve. Second issue is US policy. Unfortunately, it continues to be very much not favorable to the local conditions. Small countries are heavily dependent on the US dollar. They're heavily dependent on remittances from the United States, and they're also heavily dependent on the relations between major geopolitical players in the region. The US policy has not been friendly to Guatemalan and Salvadorian and El Salvador after those countries wished to engage in these reforms that contributed to the decline in crime. Unfortunately, there's been a fair amount of political intervention and pressure, and it has contributed to tensions, and it has not been a good situation in that respect. Honduras still continues to pursue the same typical populist policies common in Latin America that unfortunately have not been economically helpful. It has had a major drug crisis, but because it has reached such an impact, there is an effort to change. Vice President Kamala Harris has been tasked with dealing with the Northern Triangle countries. One of the efforts US has tried to do in an effort to offset the economic conditions and make people want to stay at home is to attract corporate investments inside the countries, to call for companies to invest and to contribute financially that would generate jobs, sources of income, increase the country's GDP. In theory, all of that is a good idea, but first, even under the ideal conditions, it still takes time, and it takes time to both attract the investors and create the long-term impact. But second, the conditions have not been ideal. First, everyone's been recovering from COVID, and that has impacted investments level in general. And second, unfortunately, the way this was handled has been imperfect. There's been tensions between Vice President Harris and the leaders of those countries. There's been poor communication, and just this program has not been as successful as was hoped for. So in terms of solving the issue, in terms of incentivizing people to stay home and not try to leave for better economy, it just hasn't worked from that extent.
Okay, so now Irina, but we're talking about 20 million people. That's a lot of people. The United States have a lot that's going on too, but just think about that now, 20 million people. And this is just not something that happened overnight, or well, perhaps maybe, this is not something, and I'm not trying to be critical, but what I'm saying is those are a lot of individuals. And then, like I said, I think in the country of China, they were in there nailing barriers up to their apartments and up to their houses to prevent them from coming out, to stop the spread of COVID there. And that was just in December of last month. And so they're trying to stop the crisis. Individuals don't know who has what and what have you. But we have these issues that are going on, and the immigrants are coming in. We don't know what they have been tested for, because usually when a person goes out of country for something, the United States, is a requirement that you first of all have to have a passport. Not only that, you have to have certain types of vaccines before you be able to cross into another country or what have you. But we have immigrants coming into the United States that has no record of any types of vaccines. And we do understand the fact that people are trying to, perhaps maybe get to a better living or what have you. So it's got to be in the government part as to why all of these things are transpiring. I don't know if it's the Mexican government does not have some sort of reform for the individuals where they can be able to have a better, successful type of living and what have you. But just think about it. If the world comes over to the United States, then we're going to have a bigger crisis on our hands, because there has to be food. There has to be water. There has to be something to be able to sustain them and all of us at the same time. So I think it's perhaps maybe too, and we want to get into that and talk about that as well. Like I said, we're not here to be biased, but we want to get into the fact as to, because it was something that you had stated earlier in your statement in regards to the United States. You were saying that, the United States have not perhaps maybe forthcome, just like the Vice President Kamala Harris, perhaps maybe have not been able to set an agreement. And I think President Biden was just over there with the Mexican government not too long ago. So I just can't figure it out why they have not came up to a better resolution as to be able to help. You know, because even with the Haitians and stuff, they ran them off when they had all of those earthquakes over there. They got on those horses, they ran them back and what have you, back over there to Haiti and what have you. I just think it's that the countries don't have enough resources. There's not enough economic growth. So if I think that, as I was talking to another attorney that was on the show back a couple of years ago, and he deals specifically with immigration as well, is that communication, as you stated, poor communication, and sitting down with these foreign governments to be able to see what type of successful plan that can be able to be made in order to be able to help those in their own countries.
So there's been a number of issues. First of all, there's been actually some of the policies in some of the countries have not been helpful. For instance, several Latin American countries such as Bolivia, Nicaragua, and others have had a policy of releasing low-level, misdemeanor-level criminals, and those criminals have all been fleeing to the border as a result. They literally have no space in their prisons, and so they've been releasing them outdoors, and those are the guys who flock to the borders, in addition to the families and so forth. Second is misinformation. A lot of the migrants coming to the borders have been significantly misinformed about the process and what happens afterwards, and they've just literally thought that this is their only option to have a better life, and that they sometimes don't understand that they're breaking the law, or that there'll be consequences for breaking the law, or that once they get here, they won't have certain rights, or there'll be limitations to what they can do. There's literally complete misinformation about that, and it's ongoing, and there are people benefiting from it. Criminals are benefiting from it, drug traffickers, human traffickers, who are making billions of dollars of this crisis, unfortunately. So there is a human rights disaster and humanitarian disaster as a result of these columns of migrants traveling, because even in the course of traveling, they're endangering themselves, they're endangering their families. They sometimes have discussions over how to handle yourself in the event of human trafficking. They place their children in the arms of human traffickers because they actually think that some of these people will actually get them to safety from the criminal conditions in their countries. Haiti has a huge disaster on their hands. It is what, it looks like exactly like El Salvador a few years ago before the new government came in, and there is no real assistance. And frankly, some of the humanitarian efforts exacerbated rather than resolve the disaster. There's been human rights organizations, humanitarian organizations in Haiti that fed off the crisis there, and were corrupt and did not distribute the aid. And they, instead of engaging a population in skill building that could help them overcome the crisis, they essentially created dependencies, and they created an economic disaster by their presence and by their approach. And that's just Latin American, Caribbean we're talking about. Let's not forget about other countries. They're travelers from the Middle East. Some of them have not been vetted. Some of them have no papers, and quite a few people with extremist links have made their way to the borders as well. There's been criminals from everywhere who have been taking advantage of the situation, sex offenders, murderers, gang members, MS-13. So that brings me to the policy on the U.S. side, which has not been keeping these people safe either, because there is a policy the policy of catch and release has enabled criminals to go back and harm their own communities as well as commit crimes on U.S. soil. When you have a crisis where the facilities and the security officials, border security, are overwhelmed, even with the best of intent, they cannot keep track of everyone coming in. So the sheer numbers have been overwhelming. Plus, the policy of literally keeping the borders open for anyone who comes in creates conditions that are unsafe for people who have not committed other crimes. You have people who've had terrorist links coming in. How is that going to affect everybody else around them? What conditions is it going to create in Mexico? Mexico will not want to host these people while the situation is resolved. They'll want them out. So they will not be as cooperative if they know that US policy is to encourages people with criminal backgrounds to pass through Mexico en route to borders. So
Wow.
here, on the other hand, domestically, you have a situation where the U.S. shut down the MS-13 task force that was ongoing in the last administration, which has encouraged very violent gang members to return to the United States and commit crimes on U.S. soil, and en route they can commit crimes wherever they happen to be while they're traveling here. So that creates extremely dangerous conditions. Now, that's not to say that everybody who comes here is a convicted criminal or has a record of drug abuse or alcoholism or human trafficking, not necessarily. But it does create false expectations. It does create a completely different attitude towards the law process. And then there are incentives on the ground with the sanctuary cities where people are not encouraged to try to obey the law. The immigration system in general is broken. The visa processing normally is not working well. That's another part of the problem. I'm not saying that it would solve everything, but it is a major element. When there is no quick, efficient, legal way to deal with migration, people, some people will be incentivized to try to circumvent a system that's not working well and go pass through the borders. You have corruption on the borders. You have one of the major misunderstandings about the so-called border wall during the Trump administration, it was never meant, nor was it supposed to stop everybody from coming, because a wall, a physical barrier, is just one element of a functional border security process. It should have more elements than just a physical barrier. We should have satellites observing the migration movement and providing early intelligence to border security. We should have border security officials who are competent, who have the skills to handle migrants, to vet migrants, to deal with cultural issues. We never had well-trained personnel. Unfortunately, it just hasn't been enough people, and many of them have not been well. And we've had corruption. It means that if you have 10,000 walls that are miles high, if you have corrupt border officials letting people through for money, then no barrier is going to stop them. So the system of border security should have many elements. It's a system, and all of these elements should be functional in order for it to function, in order for crisis to be manageable. So there's been an actual change in policies that made conditions that were already not great for the past several administrations, even worse now. It has reached, after COVID, it has reached a peak point. The Supreme Court actually has had to step in and basically rule that this administration has to follow the pre-existing policy under Trump, which also was not by any means perfect, but at least it was somewhat relatively manageable. We did not have hundreds of thousands of people crossing every month with no background checks whatsoever and no system for integrating these people once they come. And it's a responsibility. Providing asylum seekers with a safe place is a responsibility. Providing refugees with a place where they can get up on their feet and have some sense of dignity in having a job and having an education, that's also a responsibility. It's not just a place, just come. That's not kindness. That's not compassion. If people don't have a way to become independent, if they don't have a way to create a life for themselves and feel integrated and feel like they're contributing to society, that's not a dignified life. That's not a kindness that you're doing to them. You're just continuing another form of just bare existence. You're not helping them. You create resentment. We are seeing that most of the crime committed by migrants is not first generation people who've come here and who are seeking to escape from their bad experiences. We're seeing it happening in second and third generations. Why? Because these are the people who are not integrating well, who feel stuck between different worlds and who don't feel accepted and who don't have a positive examples. Their parents are busy trying to make a living. They don't really feel like they belong either at home or here, and so they turn to and so they turn to gangs, they turn to anywhere where they can have a sense of belonging, and that results in a proliferation of crime later, not with the people who actually come, but with their children who are growing up here, who are becoming US citizens. So we've created a long-term problem of crime that is not necessarily obvious in the beginning, because not everyone who comes here starts out as a criminal at all. But we've also enabled human traffickers. We've enabled human rights abuses for people who are seeking to escape human rights conditions, and that's not a favor to anybody. We've enabled unsafe conditions in third countries through which these people are passing, which is no favor to those countries. That puts a tension on our partnerships with them, and certainly it creates a lot of resentment among Americans and other immigrants, by the way, who've come here legally and who've overcome significant hardships to come to the United States as well on their end. Why are they getting the treatment that we haven't? Why are they getting perks and hotels and sanctuaries that, while we've had to deal with all this paperwork and risks of deportation and visas and all that headache that is inherent to normal legal immigration process, unfortunately. And skilled immigrants who are looking to find a better place to work and who have something to contribute and who are facing challenges getting here. What does it look like to them when they're seeing people who are low skilled, who are not necessarily going to be gaining any new skills upon arrival, who have significant risk factors passing through with no background check whatsoever? It looks unfair to a lot of people. It creates resentment, and that's not a good thing. It's a social disruptor.
Okay. So with that, now, who are you referring to? You're referring to the U.S. should be providing some sort of package for the immigrants when they, actually come over, because what I'm hearing is that when they cross over, it's just not people that want to cross over for better living. You have people that are sex trafficking, human trafficking, they're drug lords.
It should be kept at manageable levels. Otherwise, it makes things worse, not better for everyone involved.
Right.
If it's not manageable, you cannot distinguish people who need help or who could be handled from people who are actual criminals and should not only be deported, but frankly, if you deport them and then they just come back, that's not really solving the problem. It should be in prison. And you should be working with other governments to make sure that they stay in prison, and after they're released, that they don't come back and they don't cause any problems. We should be putting a stop and disrupting human trafficking efforts rather than enabling them. That is definitely not a favor to anybody. It's enabling additional crime. It's enabling abductions and manipulations and additional disinformation that's causing people to come here when they probably wouldn't have otherwise.
Right. So what is the problem with the Mexican government in your perspective of the experience that you have been dealing with? Seem like you have an impeccable experience when it comes to, foreign government and what have you. So I didn't get the latest on the meeting with the governor or the government between President Biden and the Mexican government. So in your perspective, what is, we know economy is one of them, but I mean, I'm pretty sure he's not having issues with food and education and different little things like that. So what are some of the steps that he's taking to maintain his own people, to be able to help them so they can be able to grow, so they can be able to be nourished? And I'm not talking about nourished by food. I'm talking about nourished educational wise, academic wise, as well as being nourished mentally, because something has to be wrong on his end too, to know that, guess what, I got everybody just fleeing the country, so what am I doing wrong? And then they continue to bring these same, officials and vote these same officials back into government, but we don't see any change where the Mexican government is even trying to help their own people.
Well, in the past, Mexico has been a very important partner for resolving border issues and migration issues. But this latest government, unfortunately, has not been nearly as helpful. And this meeting, the Three Amigos meeting, did not go well. Nothing has been resolved as a result of it, and quite frankly, none of the participants were on the same page regarding the next steps in the process. One of the issues with the current government in Mexico is its close ties to cartels, and cartels have been some of the primary beneficiaries of the border crisis. Drug trafficking, human trafficking, all kinds of crimes, you name it, they've been making money off of it. So it's to the advantage of those cartels to keep the crisis going. It's to the advantage not to prevent people from crossing over and getting to U.S. border, and certainly not in their interest to prevent them from stop them from coming to the U.S. This is the best way to include mules, willing or unwilling, sometimes undetected, and to abduct people, to threaten them, and to create a massive crisis. So the situation in Mexico itself is terrible as we speak, precisely because the cartels have gained a lot of influence. We've heard gang warfare in various cities. There is a suspicion that the latest operation that took down El Chapo's son in one of the cities was not any great accomplishment by the government, but rather several rival gangs trying to get rid of competition, nothing else. And we've heard horrible stories from various cities around Mexico, with, first of all, American tourists disappearing or being killed, and second, with these cartels running rampant against the local population, intimidating, terrorizing them, and the government has not been doing anything to stop them because a lot of the government officials have links to them and they make money of them, and they're empowered by them, and this is and this is their power base, and this is how they stay in power. It's a very, very corrupt process, and Mexico unfortunately has a very high level of corruption at the moment, and there seems to be no resolution to all of this. So even under the best circumstance, cooperation with the current government with Mexico would be very difficult, and the way this administration is handling it is also not particularly helpful. There hasn't been any affirmative strategy for Latin America or for Mexico. There hasn't been any security strategy. There hasn't been a border security strategy. There has been no plans, and frankly, our top level officials have been reluctant to even visit the border areas and to assess the situation. This is again another issue that Vice President Harris was tasked with, and she has been not very engaged, to put it mildly. She has not been interested, and she claimed that it's a thankless job that she was stuck with, but it has to be dealt with. It's actually one of the top concerns for the US. And by the way, I don't think people are speaking very much of it, but there is an economic impact to all of this. There's an economic impact to hosting people, to accommodating them, to the security process, and to the border city areas that are heavily dependent on agriculture and which have been damaged by people. These are not the annual fruit pickers and laborers who come in, do their job, and move on. We are not talking about that quote unquote illegal migration where there is some sense of mutual benefit, even if it's not ideal from a legal perspective. We are talking about people who just come in, take whatever they can get because they're hungry and move on. And meanwhile, the local farms, and especially smaller farms, are devastated, and there's a limit in resources, and it's an impact on local businesses, coupled with inflation, coupled with all these other crises that are already ongoing. This is a horrible combination for them. So these little cities, these border areas, are heavily affected by that. Security-wise, they're affected because crime is spiking in those areas as well. So imagine this situation.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's a certain crisis, but I was not aware. That's the reason why we got this case study going on or this investigation, because I was not aware that a lot of other things are coupled with just the immigrants are crossing over. And I've always been aware, though, that there are different types of immigrants that cross over to the United States border. As I stated, when I worked in the correctional division, we would pick up people from Norway. We would pick up individuals from Czechoslovakia, that were doing, human trafficking. We would pick up individuals. And of course, most of your big major cities always going to have an immigration border location, where they can be able to process and people can be able to come, immigrants can come there and get information, get processed in. And then, of course, they perhaps maybe send them out to another institution or facility until they get ready to deport them. So a saying in the United States is it's always easier to get into trouble than it is to get out of trouble. And so that's going to be the next thing, because what we're going to talk about. So it's easier for the people to cross over. And, sometimes, individuals get shuffled up, and what have you. I was able to talk to a lot of females that were immigrants when I worked for this institution. Sometimes they would cross over and without revealing the federal information for the facilities information, but these were actually personal testimonies from the female immigrants, and they would be crossing over and they would perhaps maybe tie something around their waist and tie their children to their waist and what have you. So if they have to cross over from in water and stuff like that, they would get here and they would just sob. It would be so sad and pitiful because they would lose their children. They would drown in the water just because they want freedom and what have you. I guess perhaps maybe the current would be a little swift, and then the little whatever they had around them, whether it was a water hose or a rope, it was not strong enough to be able to handle them and the child while crossing over. So we want to talk about that as well, and the fact that once they get here, that's the easy part. And perhaps that may be a challenge too, because I was not aware that human trafficking and different other things that goes on in regards to them trying to migrate to another country. But so when they get here, they're, have to be processed and what have you. And then when they get ready to get deported, now that's where the funds come in from the United States side to send them back. And then, as you stated, they will come right back to the United States because people perhaps are looking for better equality, better living. And so that's, I guess, where I'm at without being biased and what have you. As to the Mexican government, he's allowing it. Perhaps maybe he don't want to deal with it either. He probably don't want to, go away. I don't want the drugs or what have you. And then I'm pretty sure it's a lot of maybe monetary increase that's going on somewhere between the two, because the people are just not allowing this to go on. Someone is benefiting from these, from the immigrants, and so some other things they revealed to me too, the immigrants, and I cannot say it on this broadcast because it's going to be on other different platforms and things too, and so I don't want to use someone else's words and then it starts a kerfuffle and what have you in the media. So I guess I wanted us to, I guess, to talk about that. It's easy to get over here, but it's difficult to get out. It's difficult for the U.S. It's a huge process for the U.S. to be able to deport them back to their own original land.
Well, it's true, because once they're here, a lot of them end up, first of all, they're sanctuary cities where you can't, which resist the federal authorities trying to deport somebody, and they make it difficult, or people just hide. And here's the problem. Once you're an illegal immigrant, you're afraid of being deported, right? So if something happens to you, if you are a victim of a crime, you don't report it to the police. So what happens? You're victimized. Criminals go unpunished, whether they're American or from their own communities or what have you. They know that somebody who is going to be afraid to the police is not going to report the crime. So they become victimized. It makes it difficult for them to live in a way that's in any way productive, and it enables additional crime because people criminals feel impunity. They're not going to be, nobody's going to report on the police, so they can go and prey on migrants when they come to the US. So that's another long-term aspect of the, that's why it's not a kindness to allow this to continue. If we have growing and huge and unmanageable numbers of people who are insular, who is not going to be working with the authorities, it's invitation for crime to proliferate in certain areas.
Okay, wow. Okay, so we're going to do a little education before we conclude the broadcast. We're going to do a little education because our audience is coupled with Americans and also foreign viewers and watchers and participators too. So we want to educate some of our foreign viewers as well as to what an asylum is. We want to kind of, because I was in this group, and I think it was Honduras, Italians, Mexicans that were involved. They asked so many questions, and I just got in there. I didn't really know a lot and what have you, but it wasn't a group that I created. I just became a part of the group. And there were so many questions that a lot of the immigrants here in the United States do not know. Perhaps, as you stated, people are in hiding. They don't know who to ask. They don't know who to trust and what have you. And so it becomes a problem where they are perhaps maybe stifled in some areas as to how to become legalized here in the United States. So we want to talk about what an asylum is. And then we also, it's a two-pronged question. We want to also share with our viewers as well as to what a green card is. How long do they have? How long the extension? Because see, we're not here just to, we're here to help. And if they can be able to get the information from you in order for them to be able to, I came over here the wrong way, but I want to see how I can be able to prepare this and fix this. Because some people do have the right motives when they cross over, even though they perhaps maybe crossed over and it's illegal. So we want to talk about that, the green card and the expiration of that, and how long can they be able to stay in the U.S. with the green card as to seeking an asylum as well. So we want to talk about those two components.
So there's several different categories that should not be confused. First of all, there is the asylum seekers, and asylum seekers are individuals who are targeted for a particular political reason, whether on the basis of their race or ethnicity or religion or gender or anything else. So these are targeted people who are likely to be arrested, killed, tortured as a result of who they are or their political activism, if they're human rights defenders, journalists, and so forth. Sometimes these individuals are people who stand up to authoritarian regimes or particular conditions in their countries, and sometimes they're targeted as members of specific groups during a conflict. And usually conflict zones sometimes have specific exceptions that allow certain number of people to migrate to the US legally, but it's even then, it's still a very lengthy process and doesn't always work well. What many people who think they're eligible for asylum don't realize is that they can go to a US embassy or other diplomatic body in some third country and ask for asylum, and they'll be, if they're not denied outright, they will be interviewed by somebody at the embassy, and if they meet the criteria, they may be given a process to migrate to the US legally without having to go around the border. It's risky because sometimes you'll be denied, but at the very least, there is a chance that you'll be heard and you will receive some sort of assistance, and you still will be able to get out of there and leave. Refugees are fleeing conditions. They're not specifically targeted necessarily, but there are people who are suffering as a result of horrible crisis of some sort, whether it's a force majeure, like an act of nature, or a war that's going on and where anybody can be killed for any reason, and they are looking at relocation to safety. And refugees generally need to, the way international law works with these with the refugees, you're not entitled to settle in any particular country. You are entitled to shelter, to safety in the first place that is safe for you. let's say some country that you're going to, it's really not very safe or accommodating, and it's got its own issues. You're probably going to be eligible to settle in the next country, but in the country you're passing through, they still have to give you the right to pass through them if you are seeking refuge somewhere else. And there's a known condition in your country, such as a civil war. But it's different from asylum seekers, because on an individual basis, you're not a personal target of anybody, and you're not going to be necessarily arrested if you just stay there, but you are at the risk of getting killed and not having enough food and so on and so forth. So there's a huge refugee crisis now all over Latin America as a result of the collapse of the economy of Venezuela. Failed states create refugee crisis. Civil wars create refugee crisis, and some of these people stay in other countries which are also unable to accommodate them, because they're not strong economies and they have barely enough resources for their own people. So you create a domino effect of destabilization, and we are seeing that some of the crisis here is part of that aspect.
Okay. Go ahead.
And now, as for the green cards, so you have people who have so the asylum seekers are considered legal immigrants, and the way it used to work, basically, you had to wait, after 6 months, you could apply for green card, and you would usually get it within a year and a half. Now the process is much longer. And now, and then you would apply for citizenship, after 5 years, and by the time, you're 6.5 years in the US, you would get your citizenship. Now everything takes much longer because the system is completely overwhelmed, even with people who are legitimately entitled to all these things. And sometimes you could get a green card because a job would support you for a green card, because you're such an essential employee with such unique skills that you cannot get anyone in the US to fulfill your jobs. But those numbers are relatively small. A job will usually support some sort of a temporary or working visa, but not necessarily green card. Support for a green card is very expensive, but sometimes that could happen. There are different types of people who would be eligible in green card, but the one thing that they would have in common is that they would all come to the US legally. Illegal immigrants to get a green card is extremely difficult, as long as it takes for legal immigrants now years just to get a green card, sometimes years just to get to an asylum hearing. If you get here legally and then decide to apply for asylum once you're in the United States, if you come here on some other type of visa, for instance, and then you use that opportunity, it's sometimes, but while the only good news for you is that if you're in the process of waiting for an asylum hearing, you are still considered, you cannot be deported unless you commit a crime of some sort. You're still considered as if, you're considered a protected category until the asylum judge decides whether or not, immigration court decides whether or not you're eligible for the asylum, and then you still have the time to appeal, even if you do not. But a lot of the times, if you come here as a refugee or on a visa and you want to try to get a green card, there are periods of times where you cannot legally work. You cannot be legally employed but when you're here on a certain times of visa. So people end up working illegally and on jobs for cash, and that creates a shadow economy and all sorts of other problems for employers and for everybody else, but that's a different story. But if you're just somebody who crossed the border and you were not granted asylum at the border, if you just somehow managed to flee and evade the authorities, you're not going to be eligible for a green card. It's just not going to happen. So you have this entire class of people who cannot get a green card at all, and who are completely misinformed about immigration, and who are very likely targets for deportation. It doesn't mean, typically ICE and all these authorities now, because the crisis is so unmanageable, they're not really going to go after anyone unless they've committed some sort of a crime, usually a felony at this point, because just you have such staggering numbers of people and there's no way to get all of them.
Okay.
Yeah, but occasional raids, but usually that happens when you have that you have criminals in a particular community and you're going after them and you sweep up everyone else who also has immigration issues. But going after every single person who's crossed the border illegally just because they don't have documents is just physically impossible. We have a shortage of staffers for that purpose, which creates another issue, the crime levels, because we don't have enough personnel and enough trained personnel. There are problems. There are other detection tools now. There are apps and facial recognition apps and tracking for remittances and money transfers to make sure that the people who are doing that are complying with the relevant laws and not transferring too much money at once, and are not illegal aliens who've broken the law or who have a criminal record. But even that, with all those tools are not yet perfect, and even with them, the system is completely overwhelmed. It's just overwhelming number of people to deal with.
Okay, great. That's a wonderful response. So here's gonna try to see if we can be able to wrap this up. This is a good topic, wonderful topic. I think answers need to be provided. So, Irina, we know of the crisis between Russia and its states allowed Ukrainians to cross over. There were a lot of them that crossed over as well, but I think it was for maybe like a 2-year for a family member that was already originally here in the United States that was here. And so we want to talk about that. So what's the difference between, is it the number that they are afraid of? Is the reason why they won't allow the immigrants to come over from Honduras, from Mexico, places like that, versus when the war came, just like you were talking about it earlier, about civil war causes, economic issues, cause people to be able to flee from one country to the next and what have you. But the United States did approve in some areas for the Ukrainians to cross over. The Ukrainians were like a border issue, but they took whatever type of transportation, trains, planes, airplanes, or whatever to get over. So we want to talk about that too. So we want to make sure that our viewers have a better contrast, as if they say, well, they let them over, so why did they let them over and we can't come over? Because when the Mexicans come over, it's a massive number. And I don't have the statistics as to how many Ukrainians did years ago. So we're going to talk about that too.
So first of all, the program specifically that this administration has allowed is allowing people who are already in the United States and who have gotten here within the past, couple of years, the ones who are already here. It's not allowing people to just randomly cross over the border illegally. It's for people who've already gotten to the US, it's allowing them to stay and gives them basically an extension. US has actually had very limited number of new Ukrainians who are coming to the US. The number of visas has been limited, and actually the overwhelming majority of those Ukrainians who did leave their country went to Poland and to other nearby European countries and not to the United States. So the numbers who came to the US has been very limited, and most of them actually really don't see themselves as permanent refugees. Most of them are women and children whose families been broken up, and they want to get back to their families after the war is over, whenever that's going to happen. Now, as for there has been a number of Russians fleeing the draft mobilization who have been trying to cross over, and many of them have been misinformed, completely unaware that if they're seeking to avoid political retribution of some sort, their best bet is going to embassies and not crossing borders, and then they're surprised when they're arrested and then end up in jail, and they don't understand the process of what happens when you're in jail, and there's all sorts of misinformation and wrong information floating around, and This is what happens when you pick up the information from the internet and from just chat rooms and
Right.
not from lawyers and experts in the area. Unfortunately, it's very common. Now, as for Ukrainians, so first of all, the numbers are not even quantifiably close to the numbers of aliens crossing the border. Here, it's been a very, very limited number actually coming in. And second, the war in Ukraine is a recognized international crisis that is extremely deadly, and where civilian populations have been targeted, and where civilian centers have been outright destroyed. So there's no way for people to stay safe, even if they wanted to. And so that's why wars are treated differently from just bad economic conditions or high crime rate, because even in countries with high crime rate, it's not a permanent, ongoing, deadly solution. You could still relocate to some relatively safer area. There's, you're not necessarily going to be targeted on a daily basis by the same criminals. You could, depending on where you are, but it's not a necessary condition. When there is an ongoing war, there is an agreement that civilians are that during the course of the war, civilians are either going to be targeted or they're likely to be affected because the conditions are going to be consistently deadly. So that's why we had special war-related migration regimes for Syria in the past and other countries, and now they've had this special program for Ukrainians. But again, this is not a free-for-all. We do not have thousands or hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians fleeing over the border. Even with all that, most of them are going somewhere else. They're going to places that are closer to Ukraine. It's also easier for them because for various reasons, it's easier to assimilate. And the numbers coming to the US are relatively limited and relatively small. It's a very long journey for a woman with a child, which is men under 60 are not eligible to leave the country. They're not allowed to leave Ukraine.
Yeah.
Military age men are staying, and if they are fleeing somewhere, it's also most likely nearby country, because the US is not likely to take such people in.
Okay. Wow. Okay. Well, we have had an exceptional broadcast on today, providers and viewers in regards to the crisis at the border. And then we've also shared with our listeners and viewers from our special expert guests in regards to what an asylum is, what a green card is, how many, the crisis at the border, it starts from the top. It's with the government. The government has, has perhaps maybe have a broken down communication format as to not communicating fully. And sometimes individuals will do that because I really don't want to get involved, but I'll try to see what I can be able to help as much as I can, but without providing a comprehensive resolution. So we've unpacked a lot in regards to this case and this crisis that is going on at the border. It's, it's sort of sad that individuals have to flee their own country because of perhaps maybe economic reasons, and they want to come to a country. Then in the middle of it, individuals get shuffled up, with the cartels, and then they come in and they become captive as well. So, yeah, and so this is something that we're going to continue to discuss. Like I said, we had another investigation. I think it was a couple of years ago. We're going to continue this investigation, those that are in the U.S. as well as to those that perhaps are looking for answers, seeking for answers as to why certain things may apply to them and why it does not. In regards to, sometimes we point the finger, we'll say, oh, it's the U.S.'s fault. They should want us to be able to come in without even knowing it's their own government that has the, the poor communication, and where people can't sit down and make a positive resolution. And so we want to thank our guest, Irina Tsukerman for being our guest on today, taking the time to be able to answer these tough questions for us today on the broadcast. So once again, Irina, thank us on today, and hopefully our listeners and viewers can be able to take all of this back with them so it can be able to help them to be able to understand even a little bit more. So we'll be back on women, and so we would like our guests to be able to share some of her content. If she have any books that she has published that can be able to be helpful to you, she can be able to share her website with you, and how you can you can be able to follow her on any song at this time.
Thank you so much, and I really appreciate.
You can go ahead. Okay. So would you like to share your sites or anything like that? Yes. with the audience, or any books that you have published?
Sure. So I have three websites actually. One is my law firm website. It's Irina Tsukerman, Tsukerman at Law. It's if you Google it under my name, it's a National Security Boutique Law Firm. There's scarabrising.com, which is my geopolitical strategic advisory, and there's the Washington Outsider, which is a project of Scarab Rising, where different voices from around the world are welcome to publish perspectives on what's going on internationally on global and national issues of importance: economics, foreign policy, security, human rights. I also have a show that broadcasts Tuesday nights at 9 p.m. on the Coalition Radio. It's called the Washington Outsider Report, and you can see links to it on YouTube on the Coalition Radio's YouTube channel, as well as the Washington Outsider's YouTube channel under the Washington Outsider Report category. Thank you so much.
Okay, and thank you so much for sharing that with the audience. And so until next time, everyone, you have a wonderful day, have a wonderful week. Thank you once again, Irina.
Thank you so much.